So after using the ZFold 8 for a couple of weeks, I can understand why this is the best selling foldable with record-breaking sales. But how much of that is just due to hype, and how many people will end up returning this after a week or two? Because the current popularity of this device doesn't change the fact that it's incredibly hard for me to recommend this phone to everyone. As a tech enthusiast who has owned many foldables, including Samsung's, there's just something about this form factor that is almost there, but not quite right. But don't get me wrong, because it's not a bad phone by any means. There's a lot of really cool features, but also a lot of hard compromises, especially for a device that costs nearly $2,000 US. So in this video, I'm gonna go over my top 3 favorite features about this device, as well as the top 3 biggest issues. And definitely stick around until the end, because I'm gonna go over a couple of settings that you can change to really help optimize and make the most out of the ZFold 8. So let's start with the positives. The first being the size and weight. Because my very first initial impressions of this device is just how thin and light it is. It's barely thicker than the S26 Ultra or a Pixel 11 Pro. This lightness is even more crucial to foldables because, especially when it's unfolded, it just makes it easier to hold for longer durations. However, this thinness does come at a cost because they weren't able to add those Qi 2 magnets to the back of this device like on the Pixel 11 Pro Fold. Plus, the thermals are really not great, but we'll talk more about that later when we get into the negatives. Now, the second best feature is that interior display. So it seems like everyone is saying the inner display on the ZFold 8 is perfect for media consumption. It's basically the size of an iPad mini, just being able to be folded in half. When it's fully open, the crease basically disappears, and you really don't notice it in day-to-day use. And with the larger screen real estate, you're also able to multitask with a couple of apps open at the same time. But to be honest, the ratio of this inner display makes it a little bit awkward to multitask effectively. I think it's really just best suited for content consumption like watching videos and social media. Especially if you want to maximize your doom scrolling time, you can have 3 apps open side by side, compared to other foldables like the Pixel 11 Pro Fold, which really only lets you have 2. And although I'm not a huge gamer, I can see how gaming on this device can be addicting. It's big, bright, and colorful, and games just become super immersive. But speaking of games, let's get into the third positive, which is the performance. Of course, the ZFold 8 is running the latest Snapdragon chip on par with other Samsung flagships. So this thing pretty much flies through any day-to-day tasks that you can throw at it. And this is really important, especially because there's so much customization and really cool things that you can do with this device, like theming and icons. I feel like the extra processing speed is really helpful so that it prevents lag in the long term. And people also mention that the bloatware that comes with Samsung devices also leads to it slowing down, but I haven't really noticed that. And some of the apps are even really helpful, like downloading GoodLock opens up a world of customizations. I was able to test out a couple of games here and there just to see how it would perform, and there really weren't that many issues aside from it getting a bit hot. But mostly for my use cases like shooting photos, video, as well as editing them on device, it was able to run through all of that without issue. And even though nothing I'm doing is super hardcore, I feel like randomly it would start to overheat, and it's kind of inconsistent to pin down what's causing the issue. But that's a perfect segue into the first negative, which is the thermals. Like I said earlier, there really isn't that much you can do due to this thin form factor because there's no vapor chamber in here, as well as the dissipation of heat becomes really challenging. So a little bit of thermal throttling is to be expected. For example, I went on a hike with my family and I was using this device to navigate the trail map as well as take photos and videos. And I noticed, especially in that 50 megapixel mode, it would really start to lag and slow down the device as it was thermal throttling. Hopefully this is just some early bugs that they're able to sort out and improve with a software update. Now onto the second negative, which is the ratio. And this is what makes this device a deal breaker for my daily use. At first, the 10:16 outer ratio makes this phone feel great to use. And as someone who usually tends to gravitate towards smaller phones, I thought I would really like using this. But after living with it for a while, I start to notice that it's just a tad too short and a tad too wide to use comfortably. For example, on the cover screen, I really can't reach the other side of it, and I definitely can't reach the top corner with just my one hand. The shorter ratio also makes browsing websites a bit awkward because it feels like too much is being cut off in the viewport. Now you're probably thinking, Well, that's fine, right? Because you can just open up the device and then you have a much larger screen to work with. And yeah, I would say that is true. However, I use the outside screen 90% of the time, and I only open up the device when I know I'll have some downtime to either watch something or multitask. But I know some people are the opposite, and they would much prefer to use this device open 90% of the time rather than closed. And for those purposes, I think this is perfect for that. But since we're talking about the inner screen, there's a couple of issues there as well. One of the huge assets to owning a foldable is the ability to multitask on that larger display. For example, as a content creator, one of my common use cases is to have my script pulled up on one half of the display, as well as an article or a video on the other half just to reference off of. So as you can see, there's not exactly a ton of room to multitask like this, especially when the keyboard is up and I'm trying to write my script. That viewport gets even smaller. With two apps running side by side, they each become that 10:16 ratio like on the front display. So you run into the same problems, but on the inner screen. Again, this is highly specific to my use case, and it may not be applicable to you at all, but I still thought it would be helpful to provide my experience before you drop $2,000 on a new phone. Now, the third biggest issue with the ZFold 8 are these cameras. They're just not the best. Not to mention you're missing that telephoto lens. Yes, you do get that 50 megapixels, and people say that is more than enough. Technically, I agree. 50 megapixels is more than enough for both digital as well as print use. But the quality of that sensor and lens is just not on par with other flagships. And honestly, I don't recommend using that 50 megapixel mode all the time due to the processing lag as well as the terrible low light performance. However, the saving grace is the hidden 24 megapixel mode that really does improve the shooting experience. And I'll show you how to enable that at the end of this video. And to be fair, the cameras aren't all bad because of this form factor and how it's a foldable. You are able to use these back cameras as your selfie cameras for videos and photos when the device is unfolded. However, just note that there's no flex mode on this device because the hinge will spring open once it's open past 90 degrees. So you're not able to use this device as a tripod and set it down somewhere to be able to take a photo. Now that covers off on the pros and cons, but before we dive into the settings, I just want to reiterate that I'm not hating on this device. I think that if this is your first foldable, then this form factor is super cool, super novel, and that added screen real estate when you unfold the device is something that a lot of people will get use out of. But as someone who has used many foldables in the past and have a specific workflow that is required, this just doesn't really suit my needs. It's definitely one of those situations where you buy into the hype thinking that it's the perfect phone for you, and you don't really realize how it is until you're actually using it day to day. So I'm just trying to be as honest as possible about my experience. Anyway, if you're still watching the video at this point and you like what you see, I would really appreciate it if you hit that thumbs up and subscribe to support my channel. It's completely free and it means a lot to me. All right, so now let's dive into the settings and see how we can better optimize this device. Okay, so the first setting that we're going to change is really going to improve the image quality and shooting experience by enabling that secret 24 megapixel mode. So the first step is to go into your camera settings, scroll down to camera assistant, and then within these settings, you can scroll down to 24 megapixel resolution. And here you can enable both of these toggles, which will allow you to unlock that 24 megapixel mode, but also allow you to keep that as your default option. So now when you go back to your camera system, up here, you can see you have that enabled. And just look at these comparison photos to see how much more detail you are able to capture compared to the 12 megapixel mode. Now this next setting is something that really improves the fingerprint unlock on this phone. The fingerprint sensor is here on the power button, and it's a little bit depressed in the device compared to the volume rocker, which sticks out. I find it's a little bit annoying to press on this and unlock the screen. So as you can see, I'm pressing on it, but my screen is not turning on. You have to really get in there with your finger and then it unlocks the device. I know this may sound super nitpicky, but when you're unlocking your device multiple times a day, it all kind of adds up. So to solve this, the first thing is to go into your settings and just search for fingerprint. And the first setting should be the one you're looking for, which is called fingerprint always on. put in your passcode and it should take you to this screen. So this is where you're able to add your fingerprints. And if you look here, there's a setting called fingerprint always on. So once you go into this, you have a couple of options on where you want to enable that feature. So I'm going to enable this on the cover screen because that's really where I find the most issue with it. So now the fingerprint sensor should be always on and you don't need to depress the button in order to turn the device on. So let's give it a test. And there you have it. It's super quick to unlock like this. And honestly, I feel like it should have came like this by default. Now this last setting is really going to help optimize apps for that inner display. So for example, apps like Facebook can only be used in portrait mode on that inner display and won't flip to horizontal. So to fix this, you first go into the settings and you scroll down to advanced features. Within here, you have this button called labs. Now, once you open that, there's a couple of really useful settings in here. So the first thing to enable is multi-window for all apps. This allows you to pretty much open up any app you want as a pop-up window. Enabling this setting unrestricts the apps and pretty much allows you to multitask with any app you have installed. Then the next setting to enable is called landscape view for portrait apps. So once you go into here, you can see that Facebook is disabled by default. So all you have to do is just toggle that on and then go back to Facebook and you can see it works in both landscape and portrait mode now. I have no idea why they disabled it by default, but it's so much better to browse like this and have that flexibility depending on the type of content that you're looking at. Alright, so to wrap things up, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Do you own this device or are you considering it? What's your use case? Let me know in the comments below. Because for me, it's really hard to justify because of how many compromises there are. Because especially at nearly $2,000, it needs to provide a ton of value for it to feel worth it and make sense for most people. Plus, I didn't even get into the more fragile nature of folding phones, like delaminated screens and broken hinges. But regardless, I love foldables and I'm really excited about where this tech is heading. And I'm really curious to see what the iPhone Fold brings to the table. So that's it for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time. Peace.